for today's webinar on cross-disciplinary approaches to mitigation for extreme heat. I'm Noor Aridi, and along with Ambika Shuhan, we will be hosting today's webinar on behalf of the CIC and LI. If you could please move to the next slide. So some of you may be aware that yesterday we lost an inspiring professional and friend in our profession, Con Jiang-yu. We'd like to share this moment with you to remember him and the vast impact he had on the built and natural environment practice through his compassionate and pioneering approach. So with Con Jiang-yu's humble beginning in China, he went on to become the founder of Tourandscape and a professor of Peking University, reshaping cities worldwide with his concept of the sponge city. His work as a landscape architect influenced urban resiliency globally, and his design practice and scholarship earned top international awards. For us at Workstream 8, Con Jiang-yu holds a fond memory with his gracious and inspiring presence as a speaker during our last webinar. We are grateful for the legacy he built, and we will continue to reflect on his life's work and his generosity in sharing it. I hope you'll just take a moment with me to share condolences, extend condolences to all of his loved ones and the ones who knew him. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So before we introduce our wonderful speakers, I just wanted to take this opportunity to introduce our work at Workstream 8. And as many of you may not actually be familiar with it, and I understand we hopefully have a lot of returning listeners. So the CIC, the Climate Change Committee, brings together experts and volunteers from around 30 UK membership organisations across the built and natural environment sectors. It's worth mentioning that this group of membership organisations represent a rich variety of disciplines across the natural and built environment. We all signed up in 2021 to contribute to Carbon Zero, the Professional Institute's Climate Action Plan. So with this, there are 10 ambitious work streams covering a wide range of topics. All are important in their own right and bring together a whole wealth of expertise. You can find more on the CIC website, and there'll be a link at the end for you all. As a whole, the purpose of the plan is to help practitioners to address the climate and biodiversity emergency by sharing knowledge, promoting innovation, and collaborating across professional boundaries. If we could move on to the next one, please. So our work stream, Workstream 8, is led by the Landscape Institute and focuses on adaptation and resilience. Both are critical actions in a changing climate and apply right across the built and the natural environments. Our group has been working on three key themes and focus areas being water, extreme heat, and biodiversity, because we believe that each of these play a pivotal role in adapting and building resilience. So we have 4 objectives, main objectives. They keep building, but these are our main ones: to forge connections and break down silos within the profession so that we can approach it with a common language, to identify group gaps in knowledge within the field as part of the Climate and Nature Literacy Learning Programme, and sharing knowledge through things like policy, guidance, case studies, and collaborative partnerships. And 4th, to open dialogue and share resources, contributing to the Climate and Nature Literacy CPD programme activities that's part of the wider CIC and CCC. Next slide, please. So this webinar in particular marks the second in the series for 2025, focusing on extreme heat. We have previously, last year, we started with these webinars. We had 3, again, webinars with wonderful speakers aimed at focusing on our 3 areas of water, urban heat, and biodiversity. just before we start, we do have another one coming up in December that focuses on biodiversity. So do please join us now and share your thoughts with our panel as we move into this the four wonderful speakers we have. Your questions, please do ask questions. They're warmly invited. Please use the Q&A function. We want the session to be as interactive as possible. And I should say the webinar is being recorded and will be shared with resources after the event. I'll now pass on to my colleague Ambika to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Nora. To really explore systems thinking in design strategies requires holistic understanding and knowledge sharing. And our four speakers today bring together an extraordinary range of skills and insight. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Dr. Raid Mansour. Dr. Raid is a senior fellow for Greening America's Cities at the Metropolitan Planning Council. Raid joined the Metropolitan Planning Council in February 2025 as a senior fellow for the Greening America's Cities initiative, advancing neighborhood-based climate projects on trees, trails, vacant lots, and healthier communities. He previously founded the Chicago Department of Public Health's Office of Innovation and served as a director for environment innovation, where he pioneered citywide initiatives on tree equity, extreme heat mitigation, and community air monitoring. With over a decade as a strategic advisor, Raid has co-led groundbreaking public health and environmental programs, built strong community partnerships, and continues to serve on boards and working groups focused on urban resilience and equity. Speaking alongside Raid today is Sophia Valla. Sophia is Strategic Partnership Projects Manager at the Chicago Department of Environment. Sophia joined the Chicago Department of Environment in October 2024 as a project manager and is working at the intersection of environmental resiliency and community building. She previously served as a regional program manager with the Forest Preserves of Cook County, where she fostered community connections to local preserve systems and led ecological remediation projects through youth workforce development programs, centering equity in her work. Sophia advances lasting change by addressing Chicago's environmental challenges through collaborative, community driven solutions and policy recommendations. I hand over the mic to both Raid and Sophia now.
Thank you, Ambika, and thank you to CIC and LI for the opportunity to share our work on the other side of the pond. I'm Raid Mansour, Senior Fellow, Metropolitan Planning Council, and previously with the Chicago Department of Public Health. Next slide, please. And some of the things I'm going to talk about first that happened pre-COVID around the Our Roots initiative that led into the extreme heat work that Sophia will share more about. Next slide, please. So I'm going to advance a little, and then we'll step back and I'll discuss how we started this work. But when approaching community and trying to plan for some of this work, we sort of wanted to capture what community thinks about trees, climate, extreme heat, and they really help co-develop these programs. Now, we'll come in with a draft, but it's not going to be complete without them. One of the things we did was ask community what comes to mind when you think of tree equity. And I want you to focus in on right in there in the middle, in this word cloud, the vast majority defined it as health. So it could be all of those other words and phrases, but most of all, it's grounded in health, public health to be specific. Next slide, please. So you'll see the map on the left that we worked with community to drive around the city. We had 100 volunteers, and Sophia will share more on that. But one of the things we wanted to capture first is the people that are experiencing these disparities. Chicago is well known for being segregated, and the temperatures and the tree canopy varies widely. You might see the green all around the city, but it's still one of the lowest tree canopies before we started this in the United States for a big city. And you'll notice that when our weatherman gives the temperature for Chicago, um, it's usually one or two areas, usually the airports and the lakefront. But you can tell by that map how it varies. And that helped us guide some of our tree work. And if we look at the far south side there in red, um, removing some of that mapping of heat, it's actually the heat index includes humidity and temperature. You'll see um, some trees around the neighborhoods, but you can't make that out. But there's a highway, railroad, factories, parking lots, streets that all contribute to what the community feels. One of our goals with this heat is to visualize the disparities, and then the work would continue. Next slide, please. So, how do you start? First, we had a grant looking at air surveillance. We were looking at how to measure air quality. One of the things our university partners discovered was there was less pollution on the north sides, but there was something else going on. And when they used some statistical methods to see what exactly was contributing to cleaner air, they found a high correlation with tree canopy. And uh, we started looking into the literature and we said, let's build a tool. And we didn't want to create another index, but we wanted to bring in all the things related with tree canopy. As you well know, trees provide a lot of eco and health services, environmental services. So we couldn't include everything, but we looked at the ones that correlated the strongest. And so we started building this tool, and we looked at free and readily available data sets. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control of the federal government, has a social vulnerability index, which consists of 11 different variables. So we added that. We looked at the flooding susceptibility index. We looked at economic hardship index, air quality, traffic volumes, asthma cases, surface temperature, and tree canopy. That was done by Morton Arboretum. You see CRTI there. That's the Chicago Region Trees Initiative at Morton Arboretum. And these were readily available data sets, so we didn't have to waste a lot of time with contracts or bureaucracy. We were able to use them from several different organizations, and we started adding these to this tool. And we found when there's high vulnerability, high flooding, high economic hardship, high pollution, high traffic, high asthma, high surface temperature, but low tree canopy, we were able to surface some of these community areas, and you'll see them listed there. There's 77 community areas, and within those areas are neighborhoods, and the Chicago average for tree canopy was 16%. And you can see these community areas are well below that. And so we had an idea that what if we move from people in Chicago, people call and request trees from the city. What if we move away from calling and work with community and direct trees to be planted where they're most needed? Next slide. That's some of the things we observed. The tree requests were not evenly made across the neighborhoods. Um, uh, Relying on marketing and hoping that the west and south sides where the lowest canopy that you just seen in the previous map, um, uh, relying on them to just call the city is not going to make it. So we talked to community organizations, that's CBOs, community-based organizations, and we asked their capacity to plant trees. Now, we had a goal of planting 15,000 trees a year, and they told us to go kick rocks. They're not gonna help plant that many trees. It is a lot of work. So they didn't have that bandwidth. And so we had to develop a process to drive requests from community by community. We provide the trees, we plant the trees, but they tell us where to plant them. And this way, they get to shape the character of their neighborhood. It also lowers barriers to participation. We didn't want to add a fee to this. And let me preface this. When we started this, we didn't have any funding, but we knew we had to do this. Climate change is increasing the temperature, and we thought one way of mitigating some of those effects were trees. Next slide. So this is impressive. It did not start this way. I'm going to say this from the beginning. In the framework, I thought maybe there would be 10 organizations we can work with. We started bringing community together around August in 2021, right at the tail end of COVID. And we did ask community and organizations, what should we do? And so we started a conversation. And I'm proud to say that this is still ongoing. And over 180 members from many different organizations. This lone wolf mentality that some people think one or two organizations and maybe a government agency are going to solve this problem, at least in Chicago, is not going to work. So the meetings were interesting and they were fun. And to this day, they still meet on second Tuesdays of every month since 2021 at 9 a.m. And that was just the time that everyone decided that they can make it. And so that work begun. And what we started doing is asking them what they thought we should do. Next slide, please. The first thing that came out of that was, believe it or not, they said, we need a website. And if you go to this website, it's chicago.gov /our roots. We started providing the content that they wanted. They wanted us to address myths. They wanted us to provide marketing tools and flyers. And they wanted to point people to this in their community. And it started a great conversation of how can we get people to accept trees? Believe it or not everyone loves a tree. But when you see the benefits of a tree that are being discussed by your neighbors, it's more likely to be accepted than someone in government knocking on their door saying, do you want a tree? So in their language, in their culture, in the ways that they want, they were able to have conversations with their neighbors. Now, we wanted to pay our community members that were part of this tree equity working group. And we didn't have those funds. There was some innovative things done on the city. They put out a social bond for $46 million, I believe. And that provided the tools and the trees and the resources to plant them. But we needed the community to tell us where to plant them. Next slide. So we came up with this tree ambassador program, and it was a way to pay and for the community's time to go door to door. And, you know, there's 2.7 million people in Chicago. So that's a lot of ground cover. So we needed a lot of community organizations, but we didn't start out like this. We piloted in 2 neighborhoods, and we funded them, and they were successful. I'll say one person in particular worked only on Sundays for 2 hours, and she was able to get 300 trees just in her neighborhood planted. The goals were to look at disinvested, disadvantaged communities, talk about trees and advocate for them. And, you know, we helped train them about what areas within the parkway. We call the parkway, you see in the bottom right, there's a street, there's grass, and then there's a sidewalk. That area where the grass is where trees can be planted. But there's pipes and water mains and gas lines. So we taught them where a tree can go. So we basically deputized them as arborists, as tree inspectors, and they were able to survey where a tree can go, and then they would knock on the door and talk about trees. And one of the things that we made available in the training is how to speak to their neighbors about trees. And they fell in 4 buckets: public health benefits, social benefits, environmental benefits, and economic benefits. Those were key. We kept it simple, and it worked. And they were able to increase a lot of that tree canopy in their neighborhoods. As you see throughout these pictures, they did it their way, on their time, by community, for community. We didn't do something at them. We didn't do something for them. We did something with them. And that's the key. Next slide. One of the things that they did was create flyers. And I know this looks like a mishmash of just different flyers, but it was for the people that they know, their neighbors. And they held movie nights, workshops, events, different languages across the spectrum, religious institutions, social justice, environmental justice, mental health organizations, you name it, and they came. And with that pilot, we were able to secure federal funding because they worked. And this framework was successful. Next slide. And we can tell it's successful by how it shifted. Where previous to Our Roots Chicago, people would call in, and the darker green on the far left, more trees were planted up on the north side. And when you see now with the tree advocacy, 311 calls actually increased on the west and south sides where we wanted them. And the tree ambassadors were able to plant more trees on the south and west sides. And so to date, I think we're over 70,000 now, trees planted in 4 years, 1 year earlier than expected. So basically, the story doesn't end here. We took those community members and we took our knowledge of the neighborhoods and thought that let's see if we can increase programming and policies towards extreme heat in the same framework, using community to direct these projects. And with that, I don't see any questions. I'm going to hand it off to Sophia to talk about our heat work.
Thanks, Riyadh. Next slide, please. Right. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be joining in today with all of you. My name is Sophia Vella. I am the Strategic Partnerships Project Manager with the Chicago Department of Environment. Before 2024, the city of Chicago functioned without the Department of Environment. So what that means is that all environmental functions and responsibilities spread across all different city departments. And in November of 2023, the Chicago Department of Environment was reinstated and a part of the 2024 city budget. So now, as a full functioning department, DOE's main role serves as the City of Chicago's central driver of environment and sustainability policy, and we lead to work to equitably advance climate priorities through a few strategic areas. So we work on green infrastructure, climate and energy solutions, sustainability, environmental justice, and clean air and water. Next slide, please. In 2022, the City of Chicago joined 96 cities around the world in the development of a climate action plan. So Chicago's new climate goals set a great goal to reduce the city's carbon emissions by 62% by 2040. So the climate action plan was also designed to increase household savings, advance environmental justice, and improve community health and provide community benefits. So with that, our climate action plan is broken down into 5 pillars. We have our first pillar that its goal is to increase access to utility savings and renewable energy. Our second pillar is to build circular economies to create jobs and reduce waste. Our third pillar is to deliver a robust zero emissions mobility network that connects communities and improves air quality. Our fourth pillar is to drive equitable development of Chicago's clean energy future. And our fifth pillar is to strengthen communities and protect health. So in the bottom corner of the slide, there's a QR code to access the 2022 Climate Action Plan if you'd like to read it. Next slide, please. Before I jump into our diffusing disasters work that I will talk about, I want to give a little overview of all current work that DOE does that addresses heat. So all the work that we do that intersects with extreme heat is to work towards addressing extreme weather. So at this time, we're working towards building our city's capacity for heat preparedness and climate resiliency. And that is, I will highlight the Diffusing Disasters Partnership with Northwestern and Metropolitan Planning Council. But other intersectional work currently that we're doing that addresses extreme heat includes air quality and wildfire smoke communication responses. That is something that the city is newly experiencing with climate change, is wildfire smoke impacting our city. And that pairing with the summer season's heat can cause for some health challenges, and as well as updating our city's green stormwater infrastructure strategy. Next slide, please. Chicago began to think about addressing heat that all stems from the 1995 Chicago heat wave. So this event is one of the most tragic events in Chicago's history. That is a climatic weather event, and as well as within our nation's history. So, and during the Chicago 1995 heat wave from July 12th through July 16th, our city lost more than 700 lives. And it impacted disproportionately older adults who lived in social isolation. During that time, during that span of a week, we were experiencing temperatures as high as 120 degrees within the heat index, and that's well higher than any summer we usually have on average. This tragedy, though, highlighted deep inequities that are built into our city's social fabric and as well into our built environments. So the people who were most vulnerable within our city were left most at risk. And then over the past decade here in Chicago, we have experienced heavier rainfalls, record-breaking heat waves, and I do not like the heat, increased flooding, and all of this has placed a big strain on our public health systems and our infrastructure. So we've noticed that these intensified extreme weather events, they disproportionately impact our under-resourced communities, and this underscores the need for equity-focused adaptation and resiliency planning when thinking of climate and extreme weather. Next slide, please. Here, the slide details our timeline. So this is building upon what Rayetta was speaking about. So in 2022, we launched our action plan, and the Diffusing Disasters Working Group developed out of a recommendation from our climate action plan to create a heat vulnerability index of Chicago. And that was funded by the Buffett Institute for Global Affairs in partnership with Northwestern. Next slide, please. In 2023, the Department of Environment and the Chicago Department of Public Health received a grant from NOAA, that's the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, from their Office of Education and Climate Programs. This grant was able and allowed us to fund the Heat Watch 2023 project, which was a community science campaign. So this here in this slide, you see some photos of the community engagement process, and the citizen science projects allowed for an opportunity to engage with our communities, learn about their needs, learn about city's temperature, just where it fluctuates. And it was also an opportunity to spread education. Next slide. So the final products of this community science campaign were a few sets of high resolution maps. So the one that Rayad showed you was of air temperature and humidity data. And the one here on the right shows the different routes our citizen scientists had taken while participating throughout this program. So if you were to compare the first map and the second map, it kind of shows similar colorizations for heating trends. And what we've learned from this in Chicago is that not all our communities cool down or cool down at night or at the same rate, or some communities don't cool down at all. And all the more need to have equity-driven climate planning. Next slide, please. Here is our city website where you can read our reports and maps and download the data as well. Next slide. So the summer of 2024, the Heat Vulnerability Index All Hands team developed and formed to represent community organizations, researchers, healthcare professionals, and government stakeholders. This team then led what was now to be our Heat Vulnerability Index. So throughout the fall and winter of 2024, the HVI data was in the development stages, and a sub-working group was developed, our policy working group. So our policy working group meets once a week, and for over 3 months, our community groups had developed a set of 30 policy recommendations. This HVI is the first co-developed community-driven data-informed index, and in honor of the 30th anniversary of the 1995 heat wave, initial HVI analysis and emerging community priorities were presented to Mayor Brandon Johnson this past July 2025. Next slide, please. What came out of our current working group from our policy ideas, the top ideas right now that our community wants to see is green space prioritization, outdoor worker heat protections, transit hydration and cooling stations, unhoused cooling outreach, and cooling in residential buildings. So this summer of 2025, our working group took our 30 policies, because there's just so many great ideas to address heat, whether it's a policy or a program recommendation. We developed a community survey that was open through the summer seasons, and it just closed this beginning of September 1st. And these are the top ideas that are coming from that. And our intentions now with this project is to take these top 7 ideas, look into more detail and research the feasibilities of expanding these into our city ordinances and our operations, and ultimately use our now HVI to pull data that supports policy advancement in these areas, and to have the HVI as a tool in hands to community organizations from a Chicago website, or as a downloadable tool. Our intentions are to have it used, whether you're a community organization that's writing grants to do climate resiliency, or you're a first responder, or you're a city planner like me. We want this tool to just be utilized to help advance addressing extreme heat and climate resiliency in Chicago. Next slide. And here's where you can learn more about the diffusing disasters work in detail on the Northwestern website. That's where we're at currently with our project. I'd love to speak more to anyone who has any questions when it's that time. Next slide. And here is our contact information. So our department is led by Commissioner Tovar and the Chief Sustainability Officer, and my contact info is there if you need to reach me. Thank you for having me participate today.
Thank you, Sophia, and Dr. Raid for sharing your work that you're doing in Chicago. Next up, joining us from London is Asha Tomlin-Kent. Asha is a Senior Policy and Programs Officer for Green Infrastructure at the Greater London Authority, also known as the GLA, where she leads flagship programs and helps shape policy that supports the Mayor of London's ambition to deliver a greener, more climate-resilient London. She is leading the development of London Green Infrastructure Framework, a spatial evidence base for green and blue infrastructure to support climate resilience, among other benefits, including mitigating flooding and heat risk. Her work also supports the Mayor's community-led greening and climate resilience program and his citywide 10-year plan to achieve clean and healthy waterways. Over to you, Asha.
Thank you, Ambika, and thanks to the CIC and the Landscape Institute for the invite, and hi to everyone watching. Yeah, I'm excited to share some of our work in London. My name is Asha. As Ambika said, I'm a Senior Policy and Programs Officer in the Environment Unit at the GLA. So next slide, please. So I'm going to share some examples of our work in London using green and blue infrastructure, so the city's network of green spaces and waterways and water bodies, to help mitigate the impacts of extreme heat. So these are also otherwise loosely known as nature-based solutions, which is a term you might be familiar with. So before I share more about our work in London, I thought it would be useful, especially for those watching that live outside of the UK, to provide some context to our work at the GLA. So the Greater London Authority is a combined authority led by the Mayor of London, and we're responsible for Greater London with a population of around 9 million people. In contrast with some other comparably large cities, the Mayor has limited statutory power relating to green and water-based spaces and limited land ownership. So this means that there are several levers available to us to help create a greener and more climate resilient city. These include overseeing and collaborating with the 33 London Borough Councils, and also with major landowners and the private sector, including the built and natural environment sectors. Planning. So the Mayor's London Plan sets the spatial development strategy for London, and includes policies to manage heat risk in new developments, for example, by promoting passive cooling measures such as external shading, natural ventilation, and the integration of green space in new developments. And also a whole chapter on green infrastructure policies. So London is a densely packed city with little space for new green space. So there's a real opportunity with new development and also retrofitting existing space and developments to make London greener while also meeting the city's housing needs. We also provide funding for both large-scale strategic projects as well as community-led projects at the local scale. And we provide research and evidence, including open source data and mapping tools. And we also work to convene key stakeholders to make progress. So I work within the wider environment unit, and there are teams including the Green Infrastructure team, Climate Change, Adaptation and Mitigation, Energy, Waste and Circular Economy too. You may, if you're not based in London or the UK, you may have heard of some of London's sector-leading climate work, including our pathway to reach net zero by 2030 and the ultra-low emission zone to clean London's air. Next slide, please. So the UK and London are often thought of as having mild, temperate climates with moderate temperatures and a lot of rain. In reality, the pace and severity of climate impacts is accelerating internationally at an unprecedented rate, as I'm sure we're all aware of, and this is being felt here in London too. So as we continue to see insufficient global progress on mitigation or reducing emissions, the need for measures to adapt to climate impacts is becoming increasingly urgent. The timeline of major climate impacts in the UK since 2000 on this slide here shows the increasing frequency and severity of climate impacts in the UK, especially heat waves in the last 10 years, as you'll see. London, like other large cities, has an urban heat island, which means that the urban temperatures are relatively higher compared to surrounding rural areas due to, for example, urban surfaces and excess heat from transport and buildings. In 2021, we saw heavy downpours and thunderstorms leading to extreme flooding of homes, underground stations, and essential infrastructure. And then in 2022, the UK experienced 5 heatwave periods and recorded a temperature of over 40 degrees Celsius, which I've just looked up for international listeners is 104 Fahrenheit for the first time. In London, the London Fire Brigade experienced their busiest day since World War II, taking almost 3,000 calls and responding to more than 1,000 fire incidents. And the images on screen now show the London Fire Brigade responding to a wildfire in East London, and then also a scorched Greenwich Park. Since then, each summer has been the hottest on record, and we can expect to see more of this in the future, with warmer, wetter winters and hotter, drier summers, with impacts being felt by London's most vulnerable communities, for example, low-income households, the elderly, minority communities, children, and vulnerable health groups. Next slide, please. So these extreme weather events in recent years led the Mayor of London to commission an independent London Climate Resilience Review into how well prepared London is for climate impacts like extreme heat, floods, droughts, storms, and sea level rise. The review gathered evidence from individuals, communities, and organisations across London and was published last year in 2024. It makes 50 recommendations for actions directed at stakeholders across London, including the Mayor of London, but not limited to the Mayor of London, also to the UK government, the London boroughs, and the community and voluntary sector, and really requires co-delivery and ownership by all. There are a series of recommendations in the resilience review relating to heat risk mitigation specifically, which are guiding our citywide heat risk programme in London. For example, there's a recommendation relating to a strategic London-wide action plan on heat risk, and this is now being taken forward by our team as a heat risk delivery plan. There's other work on heat, of which there's unfortunately too much for me to talk about in the time I've got today, relates to protecting Londoners and our essential infrastructure in London, and also relates to the built environment, so making new and existing homes and workplaces fit for purpose. I'd recommend having a look at the Resilience Review document. I'll include it in the link in the resources pack because there's a lot of really informative and helpful information in there and might be useful for other cities watching. So today I'm going to mainly give a flavour of how we're using green and blue infrastructure to mitigate London's heat risk. So next slide, please. So one of the recommendations in the London Climate Resilience Review to the Mayor was to develop a spatial framework and evidence base for green and blue infrastructure. This being a recognition of their importance for London's resilience to cool the city and also the threat that they face from heat, drought and wildfires. So the London Green Infrastructure Framework, or the LGIF as we affectionately refer to it, will be an open source interactive mapping tool, which will provide up-to-date spatial data and set spatial strategic priorities to help target and prioritize new, improved, and protected greening. Next slide. So it will identify areas of highest need for green infrastructure. And when I say green infrastructure, I'm referring to both green and blue, so green and water. So areas of highest need for green infrastructure across the full range of benefits that green infrastructure provides. So for example, mitigating heat and flood risk, enhancing biodiversity and nature recovery, and increasing equitable access to green space. We encourage green infrastructure or nature-based solutions as a solution rather than grey infrastructure solutions in the first instance, recognizing that they're well-placed and well-designed green infrastructure can provide not just a cooling benefit and address heat risk, for example, but also several other multifunctional benefits alongside. So as part of this work, we identified 10 objectives of green infrastructure. And we developed this through extensive stakeholder engagement, both internally within the GLA with other policy teams, of which many were relevant, and externally with a wide net of stakeholders, including the community sector. And we've overlaid these strategic objectives with social and health inequalities data to highlight where investment could help achieve more equitable outcomes and support those communities most in need to address existing social inequalities and vulnerabilities to climate impacts. My team is also developing a local nature recovery strategy for London. So those on the call that are based in the UK might be familiar with this, but it's a UK government requirement. And we are the responsible body for Greater London. So it's a spatial strategy for restoring nature and priority habitat, and includes spatial data relating to biodiversity and priority habitat specifically. So this is making up the data layer for the nature recovery strategic objective and is very much tied into this work with the LGIF. Next slide, please. So the mapping includes data sets for each of these 10 objectives that show both where there is existing green or blue space and where there are areas of highest need. So for example, for heat risk, areas that are most at risk of overheating, and shows via the analysis the areas where the need for investment is highest. So for example, as you can see on the screen here, on the legend in the bottom right-hand corner, the brown hexes in the top right of the legend show those areas with the lowest existing provision, so the lowest existing amount of green space, but the highest need. And that way, this will allow us to direct resources and deploy action in the places that really need it the most. There will be a similar interactive map for each of these objectives, and also a combined map that includes combined analysis across all of the objectives to identify priority areas where green and blue infrastructure could have the most benefit and serve all of these multifunctional benefits. So the Mayor and GLA and anyone that owns or manages or makes decisions about land in London will be able to use this to prioritise locations and also the best types of greening to help with, for example, cooling and wider climate resilience and nature recovery, while also working to meet Londoners' health and wellbeing needs at the same time. So for example, they might use this to inform the type of green space integrated into a new development to help it reach its full potential and meet these multifunctional needs. So I've been leading this work and we're really excited to launch it publicly in January 2026. So watch this space. Next slide, please. We also have a range of existing tools and maps already available, including the London Climate Risk Maps, which were co-created with Bloomberg Associates. This map has recently been updated with the census data from 2021 and is available for use on our website already. This mapping identifies the areas of London that are most exposed to climate impacts and have high concentrations of vulnerable populations, and takes into account social, economic and health data, and similarly shows where resilience interventions, not just those limited to green and blue infrastructure, could be best targeted. Next slide, please. So since 2016, since our current mayor became the Mayor of London, he has made more than £30 million available for green and blue space and nature-based improvement projects across the city. And this includes the planting of over 600,000 trees. So we've done a lot of work around trees and tree planting and equity in London too, which I don't have time to go into today, but there is information online about that as well. So the Grow Back Greener Fund, which I managed, awarded grants of between £10,000 to £75,000, a total of £4 million across 3 years, to community-led projects that increased green space, planted trees, and enhanced climate resilience. Projects were targeted in areas of low tree canopy cover, high climate risk, and poor access to green space using our existing data tools and mapping. And these projects really embed community ownership and stewardship of improvements, and also local identification of need on the ground, with a focus as well on supporting those communities typically excluded from use of green space and also most vulnerable to climate risks and impacts. We've also recently announced a new funding programme relevant to those in London called the Green Roots Fund, which will, over the next 3 years on a rolling basis, a rolling application basis, award over £12 million to both small scale and larger strategic scale projects. Next slide, please. This slide just shows a couple of examples that I've picked out of some of the Grow Back Greener Fund projects that were related to heat risk mitigation, although one could argue that all of them were in a way. But this one on the left was a new wetlands at Chimbrook Meadows in Lewisham, a borough in South London. Wetlands are proven to be one of the most effective types of green infrastructure or nature-based solution for counteracting urban heating and cooling the city. And then the picture on the right is of a school called Willowbrook Primary School, which is located in Leighton, for those Londoners on the call, which was identified as a high climate risk area by our mapping. And they used the grant to transform their tarmac schoolyard from grey to green and planted trees to provide shaded areas for outdoor learning. So depaving concrete surfaces means that less solar radiation is stored and re-emitted as heat, so has a real cooling effect as well. Next slide, please. This is my last one. So this is just a bit on a couple of other programs that are relevant, but I didn't have time to go into today. So on the right-hand side, the Clean and Healthy Waterways Plan. We are convening key stakeholders across London to deliver collective action for London's rivers and other waterways as part of a 10-year plan. This may include, for example, deculverting rivers and increasing blue space in London, and increasing access to waterside spaces and safe areas for swimming during heat waves as cool spaces for Londoners. And we're working across a range of areas, including water quality, biodiversity, and ecology, access to water or access to the waterside and to get into the water, and inclusion and engagement. And then the Climate Resilient Schools programme is a £1.5 million programme that made over 100 London schools more resilient to the impacts of climate change by reducing both heat risk and surface water flooding risk, including helping schools to create climate adaptation plans and teaching children the importance of climate adaptation. This programme and funding also targeted schools that were most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and prioritised the top 10% of schools that fall within the worst bands of the climate risk map that I showed earlier. So there's more information on all of these programs on our website, which if you go to the next slide, please. You can see at the bottom the website link to our environment and climate change pages on our website. Do also feel free to reach out to me with any questions or for more detail on programs, or if you'd like to share experiences and learnings on similar work areas. That's a real whistle-stop tour covering quite a lot, but also nowhere near everything that we're working on in London in the heat risk mitigation space. So I hope that was interesting. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Asha, for sharing the GLA's work. And all of us here in London are hoping for the success of the Green Root Fund in the next few years. Our fourth panelist is Maria Villabolos. Maria is an associate professor and director of Masters in Landscape Architecture and Urbanism at Illinois Institute of Technology. With a global social and environmental perspective, Maria's work explores participatory liberation through design, botany, art, and environmental justice. As a board member of several organizations, she advocates for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She holds a master's degree in design studies from Harvard and a PhD in landscape architecture from École Nationale Supérieure du Pêchage from Versailles. Her projects include rehabilitating Maracaibo's Botanical Garden, Englewood Agro-Eco District, and the Bronzeville Trail on the Chicago's South Side, progressing from research to construction in 4 years and earning her the 2022 CELA Excellence in Design Studio Teaching Award. As a founder of Botanical City, Maria mobilizes funding for projects that connect landscape architecture, urban planning, ecology, and cultural heritage. Maria.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for such kind introduction. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here in company of my incredible colleagues. Today I speak to you as both a practitioner and an educator, and also as a citizen of Chicago. So I'll take you back to Chicago for a minute, but I'm speaking to you from New York, a few blocks away from the United Nations, where the conference is happening. And when it seems that every minute, every speech, every voice, while it might sound that is all politics, it really makes us all reflect on our changing climate and the fragility and urgency of our action. Chicago has this amazing tradition of being avant-garde on civil rights and politics and community mobilization. I started working in this project 5 years ago, in the project of growing landscape education and urbanism in Chicago while rooting justice. At IIT, we believe in a landscape architecture education as a journey towards environmental and social justice through design, the knowledge of plants, and the direct engagement and experiences with the living world and our changing climate. Our process often lives in underrepresented neighborhoods, habitats, and cultures to join ongoing initiatives like the one presented, for example, by my colleagues early, with multiple stakeholders, the city, the government, the county, to imagine and enact collective action. If my colleagues here help me with the next slide. When we started, for some reason, the image is not coming up really great, but imagine filling up the blanks. What we are after when in the program is to really imagine this sort of what we call a botanical city metaphor. A city where all those, if you remember those maps that Reed was showing, where the tree canopy was lacking, where the disinvestment was happening, where you will also find lower indicators of life expectancy. Those kinds of, in that map also informed and gave us clues, soul, and a mission to landscape education at IIT. Some of our 3 most important projects are the Englewood Agro-Eco District. The image I'm happy to send you all a copy of it in full resolution, but it's very interesting because Chicago has the largest lakefront system, public waterfront system in the United States, over 26 miles. And most of it was designed by Olmsted. So it's also, this extraordinary system of public spaces. But cities are like that, no? They are some do their parts and then the next generations do the others. So while the maps and the data tells us where to go do the work in a sort of very pragmatic way, it's true that there are also these kinds of beautiful lines in the territory that connect the ancestrality of the landscape. So in the lines that you don't see here, you will find Jackson Park, Washington Park, Mills and Plazas until you meet the lake. And our projects have been about reconnecting the relationships between the corridors and the lake. In Chicago, we live in this kind of Northwest, very capitalist relationship with the loop, with the center of the city, which you will see around here. So a lot of the growth of the city has been, as many of you experienced planners here in the call can imagine, in this kind of relationship of North-South. That's where you will find most of the consolidated canopies. So following this kind of interest on rebuilding the relationship between the human of human, the culture and nature beyond differences and distances, we've been putting our emphasis on the trails, on the connection to the lake, the east-west connections, no? And the two images, the two projects I'll have the space to show you today are the two trails, the Inglewood Trail, the Bronzeville Trail, and our dear Alphawood Arboretum. In the next slide, first step was to transform our campus into an arboretum with the help of the Alphawood Foundation in collaboration with Open Lands, who now hosts their training seasons in our campus. So our campus is kind of the epicenter for all that training. You know, we want to join our friends planting not thousands, but hundreds of thousands and millions of trees. For that, we need to train the next generation. This is critical. Chicago is also this is in Inglewood, one of the neighborhoods that our colleagues here shared with you was one of the pilot neighborhoods. And some of the neighbors in those photos, like Boesa and Tanya, and we recognize, we work with the same constituency, no? And even in these neighborhoods where in general in the city, in the north-south kind of canopies, you will find a lack of trees, and that's what the GIS shows you. Also in these pieces of infrastructure that are so typical of the Midwest, of these post-industrial lineal infrastructures that were abandoned, had been sitting abandoned in the communities for more than 50 years. They had become these sort of beautiful temples, no? These kind of ruins, but that are desperately alive. And they run throughout Chicago in this relationship with the lake, no? East-west, really beautifully. There are over 28 of those in Chicago. So what about we focus on these ones? Working with then Commissioner Cox, who was also an instructor at IIT, and I was lucky to teach with him for 4 years. We decided to focus on these corridors and what if they became the center, no? And then the next slide will show you how we started really in the classroom with the students. Maybe the next one forward. Yeah, thank you. We started with the students in the classrooms. You know, when we started, we have $0. And we started working with the incredible team at Grow Greater Inglewood and Anton Seals and an enormous community for a process that in a matter of 3 years transformed into a real movement, raising over $100 million from federal dollars to private donors. And last year, enacting the first urban agroeco district in the United States, the Inglewood Agroeco District, by unanimous vote of the City Council. So if a reality that is legal, is financial, and more importantly, is grounded, rooted in people's action. In this kind of movement, that it starts on the streets, goes to the classroom, and back to the street. No, it's this changing climate, addressing our changing climate, rooting justice for real. It's gonna take these kinds of movements from our Chicago experience, where we learn by traveling together to visit the best case studies, where we learn by testing ideas, where we learn by growing. The next slide, we've been just to tell you how this, you know, what you can find in this report, that in these kinds of, more than the report, the actions, is we look at the large framework, one that will take 30 years, but then we focus on intersections, on key crosses for particular reasons. And we are simply trying to allow the trees to be the protagonists. But what kinds of trees? Very special kinds of trees in Inglewood. All these abandoned post-industrial districts, as you can expect, as you can imagine, they have a high degree of pollutants in it, which pollutes our soil, pollutes the water, and pollutes the air. So what to plant became really, really critical. And for Inglewood, the community decided to love, to embrace what you see on the screen that we call the golden ancestors. The aspen trees, which are the second oldest, largest natural formation of trees in Illinois, and have the largest capacity to retain inorganic pollutants in the soil, but also to extract organic pollutants, while at the same time, they remind us of the golden springs of Mother Africa that it builds this kind of connection, intangible connection, and help us repair the absolute disconnection by force with the land that happened over 400 years ago and ever since, and also the disconnection of immigrant communities, that longing for reconnecting with the land, particularly if you think that immigrants come mostly from agrarian communities. So we do plant trees by masses, by numbers, by their capacities, but also trying to really focus on what do they mean for our emotions, for our cultures, for our long-term engagements and relationships with our past, and therefore with our future. So our golden ancestors in the next slide. We have this large framework, no? Then we focus on the key intersections that we all decide together through workshops, through establishing international and national collaborations, from our living rooms to the classrooms to the communities, really working together. In the next one, then you go through the multiple scales. You pass the large agro-eco district. You focus on the intersection. And the next slide, I believe it was that shows you and gives you, it's an invitation to come to Chicago to the Inglewood Village Plaza 58 and Halsted, where what started then now with drawing that future at the very, the square of a neighborhood. But what kind of a square would that be? To promote and go faster in our goals of changing who we serve, how we serve, and where we serve. It's 3 years, and a lot of people told us, oh, you cannot do this, you decide. Remediation tells you that you have to dig 3 feet, take all that dirty soil and send it to a safe site where you can imagine the type of communities that live next to those dumping sites, right? I'm asthmatic from birth, so believe me, I know what that means. A lot of barriers of all kinds, financials, legals, everything. But the community have given themselves permission to test these ideas. So in a matter of 3 years, everything went from the massive, large scale of not even having a plan to, next slide, please, having the golden ancestors planted on the first square. So they are currently now being monitored. We are going to prove how much soil they are cleaning, how much air they are cleaning. Community events happening all the time. Here last year, we hosted the Black Abundance Dinner, the same day that in the Chicago Democratic Convention, the first Black woman accepted her nomination for president. It was an exciting day, meaning, you see, it's all connected. Science and art go together. Ecology and culture are the same thing. So planting trees is rooting justice, or as Anton always tells people, agriculture is culture. But what kind of culture that is? That's what we are so interested in. Really excited to do in Chicago, because every tree we plant is one ancestor we honor, and a better, cleaner future we live for the communities. But there are so many more trails to do. There are so many more. In the next slide is the next one we are working on is the Bronzeville Trail. really close to IIT. IIT is on 34th, the trail is on 40th, so only 4th Street. So it is our campus. It is right at the heart and connected with the Alphawood Arboretum, and working with the Bronzeville Trail Task Force and John Adams as the project principal. We are now launching this initiative with the support of the Mellon Foundation and the Department of Planning in Chicago, who is going to start working on ideas for the rezoning and transformation of the neighborhood, meaning it takes all of us, right? It's the work in the classrooms, in the government, in the private sector. The difference is that the vision, who holds the vision, is the community organization. It's not really anymore the government. It's not the academia. It's not the private practitioners. Who holds the vision is the community. That's the difference. The community organizations in Chicago lead the way. And that is really exciting. I think the next one is the last slide. To say that the work also together with the leadership of the community organizations, we are all understanding that, you know, planting a tree and writing a book is also the kind of same thing, because it leads for the next generations a different kind of testimony of a culture and a process and a moment of an existence that can no longer be erased or changed or told by somebody else or with a different voice. That planting the aspen, the celebrating the golden ancestors, the cleaning soil, cleaning water, cleaning air, rooting justice, also comes with the responsibility to writing the stories together. All different voices and all different perspectives, in a pursuit of happiness that extends beyond one political crisis or one environmental crisis of the day. Come to Chicago. We look forward to meeting you all, happy to answer any questions. And more importantly, I am mindful that I'm sharing the room with some of the most brilliant minds in the world. And please contact us at Botanical City on Instagram. Keep the conversation going, and we hope to see you soon, and we hope to establish long-lasting collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Actually, all brilliant minds, you included, and we want to thank you for those incredible presentations. We have time for questions now. So please, if anyone has questions, do use our Q&A panel. So if we can just bring back everybody. Yeah, there we go. So there is a question here from Tristan who's asked about tree equity. And he says, tree equity is inextricably linked to a fully functional biotic pump. To what extent does this mechanism feed into your work? And I think that's directed towards Raed. So if we could bring you into the conversation, please.
Sure. Interesting question. Chicago doesn't have extensive forests to create that pump, as far as I know. Although I have to give credit to the Cook County Forest Preserves in Chicago, which is the largest forest preserve system run in the United States. So it's about 70,000 acres, but it's spread out and it's not consistent. We do have a large lake that almost looks like an ocean. If you're standing in the shores, you can just Google it and check it out. It's pretty huge, and that provides the cooling effect. In that same thought regarding creating water through the trees' transpiration, the Midwest is well known for their corn, their crops, and in June, July, when the corn is starting to mature, There's something known around the Midwest as corn sweat. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. That is the transpiration or evapotranspiration from the corn, which Illinois has a lot of corn. It's about 11 million acres. And you're talking about billions of gallons of water pouring into the air in Chicago. So it is a very urbanized area. And while we do have the lake, urban heat islands actually warm up the area 4 times as much as what the lake can cool and provide to us. And I saw the other question that's kind of related to this regarding temperatures. You know, Sophia showed that there's a 22-degree difference from north side to the south side. The north side was by the lake, and that southwest side was 22 degrees warmer. Waste heat contributes about 20%, at least through different studies that I know of in the US, 20% of the heat that's generated in urban heat islands. And with waste heat, I think you mentioned cars. So it's cars, trucks, roads, industry, and HVAC. So the heating and air conditioning system. So those are actually generating heat, while the vast majority of the heat that's expressed in the urban heat islands is due to the asphalt and the roofs and lack of trees or greenery. I
Thank
hope
you.
that helps answer that. Interesting
Yeah, and
point.
to
I was
add
actually
to Rayed's point too, without the forest preserves of Cook County, a lot of extreme weather events or those climate events, the heat and flooding that happens in our city would be a lot exacerbated without them. So like Rayed said, the forest preserves of Cook County is the oldest forest preserve system in the country. It's the first ever to exist, and it's the largest, and it's in the third largest county in the country. So it makes it extremely unique. So their mission is to keep acquiring and transitioning land into natural spaces. And I dropped a link if anybody'd like to know. So big partnerships there to address all those issues.
brilliant. Thank you, Sophia. I wonder if Maria, you could come in here as well, and you could add on to that in regards to temperatures and trees and car parks and all of the built infrastructure versus green infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you, Nora. It's some of the maps that Reed shared earlier show how the red areas are in the south, right? That's also the kind of trail work that we prioritize. Knowing that it will be doing that. To me, it's really fascinating because while we as scientists and professionals tend to really focus on the numbers, to implement it, that data has to mean something different for people. The relationship with trees is an emotional one, it's a cultural one, it's a long-lasting cultural memory. And so sometimes I prefer to, I kind of tend to prefer to, plus trees are alive, they are living beings, no? They have a life, they grow constantly. So we are mindful of that and always try to think about them in that regard rather than on their data, mathematical contributions to the environment. However, I think the kind of conversation about quantities is one that enters a capitalistic logic in a way, but I think the quantities are very interesting when you think about them together in a sort of combined way, right? Because like the trees is the water, the soil. I think if we look at the numbers of how the ecosystem is, I'm working, for example, on a NSF, National Science Foundation research, is the largest research in Chicago right now on stormwater justice. And what we've been learning is that the kind of key will be the density in which we plant those trees. The benefits increase in relationships with density. So right now I focused on the kind of cultural meaning of what those groves, sacred groves, will mean. And if any of you here in the audience have case studies that would like to reference and send our way, that'd be awesome.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks. Asha, there's a question for you right here. So if you could just come in. How is the GLA working to accelerate deployment of NBS in the London boroughs, given its lack of direct control? So Anne has asked this, and if you can, there's a second part to it. So I'm aware that a number of LB councils have adopted progressive policies for the NBS, advocating for bi-solar roofs. But when it comes to planning control, the planning control teams are still blocking progressive planning applications. So this is actually a really interesting topic. It's quite a big one, I know. But it's also quite relevant to some of the other speakers as well. But Asha, I'd like to bring this to you first.
Yeah, I can do my best. I think firstly, some of the work that we do comes back to the convening and influencing. So, well, firstly, influencing within our organisation as well. So I know definitely at boroughs and at government institutions and authorities, sometimes there's a lot of siloed working. So a lot of the stakeholder engagement that we do is working with our own planning team for planning applications that get escalated to the mayor and to influence the London plan and the development of the new London plan, which is in development at the moment, which obviously then trickles down to how the London boroughs set their own local plans and their own local planning policies. We also sit on a number of different kind of networks and groups. So those in London anyway, coordinated by London councils, for example. They've got I'm going to get the name wrong, but a Green and Resilient group made up of borough officers. And as I understand, that's officers across both the kind of environment and climate and planning teams. I think there is definitely a tension between planning policy and environmental or climate ambitions sometimes. I think planning policy can do a lot, as I say, for us as a lever to support environmental ambition and progress. But another tension area that we're aware of, for example, in the green infrastructure space is with green walls, and so that kind of nature-based solution or green infrastructure. So the greening that sits on buildings, and there's a tension there with fire safety regulation. So for us, that's something that we're working internally really closely with our planning and fire teams on to develop policies to make sure that these kind of interventions are still encouraged, but kind of in a safe way. I hope that's answered to an extent, but with regards to more detail about the planning teams at boroughs, I'm afraid I'm not from a planning background, so I probably wouldn't have much more to say on that.
Thank you, Asha. But it is pertinent in regards to challenges, isn't it, for all our speakers today? So these sort of cross-disciplinary and approaches to getting things implemented. Could any of you speak to some of the challenges that you have faced in implementing? Particularly, there is a question from Alistair actually around maintenance of the trees as well, putting in the trees and the maintenance, and who does it? Is it the community? Where is the funding from as well? So maybe we start with you, Raed.
Yes. There was a lot of discussions on how to maintain these trees. The city puts out a contract, its lowest bidder, and the trees are warranted for 2 years. That means if they don't survive in the first 2 years, they get replaced for free. But we didn't want to waste all that time and money and energy to get them replaced. Within that contract is a watering and mulching a requirement by the contractor. So They don't get to all of them, though. So one of the things we have worked with community, and we provide for funding, is for them to help care for the tree, especially in the first 2 years. We give watering instructions to all homes that receive that tree in the parkway. And then we determined through the Department of Water, which bills the residents for water usage, because sometimes money is a factor, but we found out it costs $3 to $6 a year to water one tree. So we were trying to remove barriers, and that's the biggest bureaucratic thing, both on the community side with myths and in the government side. Excuse me if there are people from Los Angeles, California on here, but they started a myth that went across the nation that trees promote violence, and that stemmed from the police department that wanted sight lines of the sidewalks stating that, criminals might hide behind trees. There's nothing further from the truth, and no study can back that claim. So while they were cutting down trees, they were actually hurting that environment, both stormwater, runoff, urban heat islands, decreased shade. I could go on and on. Decreased biodiversity of the number of animals and insects that rely on those trees, plus increasing air conditioning costs. So I can go on and on. So we meet a barrier and we try to find a way to solve it. The funding was from the federal government, and there were one that was an earmark where a U.S. Representative gave us $100,000 because we didn't want to wait until we had a grant or we had money. We knew that this had to start. And even though in that pilot I used some city funding, I didn't have any other funding after that. So it could, if we didn't prove what we thought would work, we probably wouldn't get that funding. I think that proof of concept is really key. Governments like to do pilots because it sounds like, hey, it's not long term. If it doesn't work, we're not committed. But sometimes when they do work, they don't want to fund them, So we had to really build consensus through community and government. And when I showed you that list of tree equity working group members, it wasn't just the Department of Environment. It was the mayor's office, Department of Environment, Public Health, Streets and Sanitation, Bureau of the Business Department, and Parks and Planning and Development. And it was an opportunity for community members to come to a meeting and meet with actual government officials. And I'm not talking just some administrators like us, but it was from the mayor's office, deputy mayor, commissioners, assistant commissioners. And they were able to talk directly to the community about trees. And that's how we started looking at creating different policies. And so with regards to there's a law in Chicago that says it must be so big and it has to be so many feet from here and there. We found ways around that. We made instead of a square, it's a rectangle. And it's not that hard. Everything in Chicago is pretty easy. 5 feet from a water and gas main, 5 feet from a sidewalk, 25 feet between trees. It's all factors of 5. Our sidewalks are 5 feet by 5 feet. So we didn't have to take out measuring tools. It was easy to train the community. And we were able to get trees there. Where there's no grass or parkway, we cut the sidewalk open, and those folks were more than happy to see part of that sidewalk gone and replaced with mulch and trees. So it is an ongoing conversation. Once you solve one problem, there's going to be the next one. And I didn't see any questions, but I hope there's no soil questions. I'm not an expert in soil, but that, things like that come up: water, soil, shade, bus stops. I went too fast. 12 minutes to cover 4 years of work. So I'm
Yeah,
sure I
no, we
missed something.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
We appreciate that all of you have vast experience and projects that are ongoing. We do have a little bit of time left, just a tiny bit of time, and I'd like to bring a question to Maria around cultural heritage and cultural landscapes and how you communicate. So there is a question around communication with, convincing community about the importance of these green infrastructure solutions. So can you give a little bit into that, a little bit of feedback in your approach?
Thank you for that question, and kind of connects to the prior one. Chicago is pretty amazing in a way that we don't need to do work of convincing anybody. I think we just learn from them. They really lead. They will be, the ones that will tell you agriculture is culture. And an aspen is a golden ancestor. This vocabulary does not come from faculty members. It comes from the community members. I think that that culture that we are really going to have to do a lot of work actually on doing more of the deep listening to the community rather than convincing. In that deep listening, for example, they'll tell you how they are ready to take over the maintenance of those trees and of those landscapes. And instead of that being, as traditionally has been, a bidding process from the city to a list of contractors that is small and is exclusive, and it benefits one race and one gender. They have never stepped foot in the neighborhood. Those community groups will tell you, look, we're ready to do the maintenance ourselves and get paid for it and create jobs in the community and let those jobs stay in the community. So they are not ready just to kind of also participate as just goodwill, but actually entrepreneurs that can take care of their own destiny. And that means they're keeping of their communities. There is a beautiful line in Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, where she says, I knew I have left my neighborhood and I was in a different one because of the trees I could see on the street. So all that work that Reed, Sophia, and so many others in the city had been doing, that's what rooting justice looks like. I think it's a cultural project. Regreening the city is a cultural transformation. And in our Chicago experience, I don't think we need to convince anybody. I think we're following our neighbors. We are listening. We're just doing deep listening and learning together on how to do it. How to do it in a way that shares power, that decentralizes power, that democratizes resources. And all that is culture, right? It's a different culture when we allowed ourselves to trust each other to do the work of repairing our communities. And that's going to take enormous transformation of bureaucratic barriers. And that might be the hardest of it all. That might be the hardest. I think the deep listening also happens, with the best music and the best food and the best people and the best friends. So that's the joy in the process. I think if there is something hard about it, is that cultural transformation is going to take the transformation of our governments. That might be the hardest part of the job.
Thank you, Maria. We are over time, but I just wondered whether any of you have any last thoughts you'd like to add, or anything you'd like to share on the topic of extreme heat mitigation. No? Thank you so much. You've given us a lot already. I will hand it over to my colleague, Ambika, to give us the closing slides. Thank you all.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you for all our speakers today for sharing their varied expertise on today's topic, which didn't feel like an hour and a half gone by so quickly. Thank you all who have posted questions. Just a note that we will be sending a copy of the webinar to everyone who's registered today. And we have also added a resource page, as you can see on your screen, at the end of the webinar, if you wanted to explore this topic further. So just to conclude today's session, we explored how different cities can adapt to extreme urban heat through cross-disciplinary and community-driven strategies. Rising heat intensified by climate change and urbanization threatens health, infrastructure, and ecosystems. So collaboration is essential. We heard Chicago's Our Root initiatives, which tackles inequalities in tree canopy cover. By empowering communities through a tree ambassador program, they've managed to plant 70,000 trees in 4 years, linking equity with climate resilience. From London, we saw how the Greater London Authority is addressing climate risk, heat, drought, flooding through the London Climate Resilience Review and the Green Infrastructure Framework. These efforts combine evidence-based planning with community-led projects like the Grow Back Greener and Green Roots Fund, ensuring adaptation benefits are widely shared. And then finally, we looked at design justice approaches with Maria in Chicago's South Side, where community-led urban landscape projects like the Bronzeville Nature Trail show how small, equitable interventions can transform local communities. Overall, the key takeaway is that tackling extreme heat requires not just technical solutions, but inclusive processes, breaking down silos, combining science and policy with lived experience, and co-creating solutions that are both scalable and equitable. To round it up, it will actually require a range of skills, greater collaboration, and innovative practices. In the 4 presentations, we looked at a variety of approaches and nature-based solutions as examples to carry us forward. Please do email us on our Workstream8 Gmail account if you have any unanswered questions for the panel members or otherwise, and access the CIC website at cic.org.uk for work of various work streams. And as always, we would like to leave you with one open-end question to take home today, which would be, how can we design climate solutions that protect us from challenges of rising temperatures, but also heal our ecosystems and strengthen the social fabric of our communities? With that, we want to thank you for all your time this afternoon and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.